Want a thin gaming laptop but you can't afford the Razer 15? Well, let's take a look at the Asus Zephyrus S GX531. Hi, this is Stephen from Omen. This year, Asus launched the Zephyrus GM501 with a full GTX 1070 and the GX501 with a max-Q GTX 1080, switching from a quad-core 120Hz display from last year to a 6-core 144Hz one this year, but still with G-Sync. Now, to compete with the likes of the MSI GS65, Razer 15 and Aero 15, they decided to slim it down to just under 16mm thick and increase the battery life by using Optimus technology and a lower powered 1070 max-Q. The idea being that the GX531 will be more of a laptop that you can use away from the wall socket if you need to. Now, I really like the styling. The lid is CNC machined out of a solid block of aluminium and anodized black with a striking two-tone design. The rear of the chassis is sharp looking as well, with a gold line that extends along the side of the chassis. I do like the ROG symbol that subtly shines red when powered on, but it's not configurable, unlike the Razer logo, which can neither pulse or be turned off. The chassis is made out of an aluminium magnesium alloy and it is very sturdy. The bezels are slim and its hinges are nice and sturdy. The webcam is up top, but unfortunately it really does overexpose things. Well, this is what the webcam looks and sounds like, and I must admit it looks rather poor. The AEO panel is an AVHA 144Hz 3ms and it's perfect for gaming. In my ghosting test, it performed on par with the Razer 15. Its colours are nice and vivid. They're good for games, movies and also for content creation. And viewing angles are pretty good, even when there's light glaring on it. Now, this is helped by having a high max brightness of about 359 nits, making it brighter than the Razer 15. But the Razer 15 is brighter at 75 and 50% brightness levels. You can see this extra brightness in both my colour and backlight bleed tests against the Razer 15. The Razer Zephyrus has more backlight bleed, but you can see more detail in darker areas on the Zephyrus, but colours are more true to life on the Razer, as shown in these stained glass window shots. According to Spider5 Pro, the colour accuracy actually was very similar between the two, the Razer perhaps just being slightly better. Unlike most laptops, air is not brought in from underneath, but via the vents above the keyboard. The Razer 15 also does the same, but it's not as obvious. Now, air is also sucked in through a very clever hinged plate that opens 5mm when you open the laptop. Now, an RGB light does shine quite brightly through this gap at the sides, but it does switches off after a bit when the keyboard is not being used or when the key lighting is turned off. This is good because I remember on the original Zephyrus this was quite blinding. The keyboard is brought forward to allow for extra cooling, and indeed the keyboard area is nice and cool. The area over the heatsinks naturally gets warmer to about 45 degrees, but it's the same as the Razer 15 and you don't touch this area anyway. Underneath it gets to about 50 degrees Celsius, which is the same as the Razer 15, but cooler than both the Aero 15 and GS65. To get inside, you first remove the bottom flap cover to reveal a very solid chassis. You then remove several Torx 5 screws and remove the rear hinge cover. This allows you to lift up the top deck of the laptop. You have one M.2 PCI Express SSD slot, one stick of 8GB of RAM, so the other 8GB must be soldered to the motherboard. You have a very small Intel Wi-Fi card, and you have the fans for the GPU and the CPU with an individual heat pipe for each one. You have two shared heat pipes and another heat pipe joining the two rear heat sinks. It is good to see a total of 4 heat sinks here. Under the keyboard area you have the 50 watt-hour battery, but unfortunately even without G-Sync, battery life is not great. I got about 4 hours at 25% brightness using silent mode versus 7 hours with the Razer 15 and GS65. Dropping the screen to 0% brightness or 20 nits and undervolting did squeeze out about 4.5 hours. Now, if you do switch to the Windows power profile, the battery life tanks to about 2.5 hours. Now, this possibly could be because of the 12-volt fans. Anyway, the screen is still pretty visible in daylight at this low brightness, but still it's not going to be ideal if you're going on the road and you need to type up some reports. The good news is that it only took 75 minutes to fully charge. when it was powered off. So like the Razer's gaming mode, the turbo mode on the Zephyrus not only overclocks the GPU, but also increases the average clock rate of the CPU. As you can see from my handbrake chart, the clock rate in balance mode averages 3065 MHz, but apply to turbo mode and this increases by 10%. The result is a very good encode time, easily beating the Razer 15, and in fact this is a class-leading performance for the i7-8758 CPU. Using the throttle stop, I was even able to push it a little bit further, which is amazing. The same is seen when you use the CPU to render a video in Adobe Premiere Pro. Turbo mode boosting the CPU by 12%. This mode also increases the fan speed, so despite a higher clock speed, temperatures remain very cool. In fact, applying an undervolt gave a max CPU temperature of 75 degrees. Look at these gaming temperatures. Balance mode is in blue and turbo mode is in orange. Starting at the top, we have the max GPU temperature steady at around 68 degrees. For both modes with average temperature in the low 60s. Compared to the Razer, we are about 10 degrees cooler. The max CPU temperature is also good at about 83 degrees, the higher fan speed offsetting the increase in CPU clock speed in turbo mode. An average of 70 degrees is very good too, again about 10 degrees cooler than the Razer 15. Now you've got to bear in mind too, my Razer 15 has been repainted with liquid metal, so the gap will be larger if you have a stock model. So I can't emphasize this enough. The Zephyrus GX531 is a great choice for those who do not want to tinker with undervolting, using throttle stop, that type of thing. It's basically plug and play, the way it should be. The Asus Armoury Crate software allows you to view system clocks, temperatures, controls fan speeds and overclock. It even has a mobile app that allows you to keep an eye on things while you are gaming. There are 5 power modes. There's Windows, which lets the laptop use the Windows power presets. There's a silent mode, which is meant for situations where you want minimal noise, and indeed it is totally silent, and the CPU downclocks to about 1000 MHz. So this is the mode you really need to use for best battery life. The third mode is balance mode, and at idle, this produces 35 decibels and the fan speeds up to about 2800 RPM. Under load, the balance profile increases fan speeds to about 5000 RPM and 50 decibels of noise, whilst turbo mode, under load, the fans spin all the way up to about 6800 RPM and 53 decibels of noise. Compare this to the max fan noise of the Razer 15 of 44 decibels. So you do get lower temperatures at the expense of some fan noise, but that's okay in my book. That is what these 12-volt fans are for, after all. You can also use the manual mode, which allows you to both overclock the GPU and adjust the fan speed as a percentage of the maximum. I settled with a max overclock of about 168 MHz on the core and 300 MHz on the memory, with a fan speed at 55%. At this setting, playing Overwatch, the CPU and the GPU run in the low 70s. Frame rates are in the high 120s, but I did notice that the CPU clock was pretty low, and it also wasn't pulling that much power. It was pulling about 20 watts. Fan noise was reduced to 45 decibels, which is great, but in all my tests, I only got 1 extra FPS over the turbo mode. So, you might as well stick with the turbo mode. But if the fan noise is a concern, this is a good route to take. Looking at the ports with the Razer 15 on top for comparison, on the right hand side, we have a USB 3.1 Type-C and a Type-A port, but there's no Thunderbolt. It is a strange omission. You will need to go for the Zephyrus M or the GX501 to get that. Around the back, you get HDMI 2.0 and a Kensington lock. On the left hand side, you get the DC port, a second USB 3.1 Type-C, 2 more USB 3.1 Type-A ports, and a combo headphone mic jack. The fins on the side heatsinks are angled, so warm air doesn't blow on your hands, but to be honest, not much hot air comes out of the right CPU vent anyway. I was also a little bit miffed that there was no mini display port to connect to an external G-Sync monitor. That leaves you with one video out via the HDMI, and that works pretty well. Now, depending on the game, you can get good frame rates. Even at the resolution of 3840 by 1600, I was getting over 69 FPS in Overwatch, and that is with epic settings. Now, you must make sure to keep the laptop lid open though, otherwise the laptop will not get sufficient air and the frame rates will drastically drop. Now, with the laptop being so slim, there is no Ethernet jack either. The download speed on the Zephyrus via Wi-Fi was much worse than the Razer 15, although the upload speed was the same. I did actually try doing some live streaming using the Wi-Fi and it was very laggy. So I would definitely suggest that you use a USB to Ethernet adapter if you're going to do that. The speakers on the Razer face upwards. On the Zephyrus, they're at the hinge facing forward and are 10 decibels louder. The Asus keyboard only has 1.2 millimeters of travel and does feel rather mushy, so I do prefer that on the Razer 15. Now both use Windows Precision drivers on the trackpad, which is great. Now naturally the Zephyrus trackpad is not as wide, so it does require more movement to scroll around the screen, but I do like the separate mouse buttons. And its placement is on the right hand side, so it's okay for me because I'm right-handed, but of course if you're left-handed this could be a problem. Above the trackpad are some buttons. You can turn the trackpad into a number pad, which is great, and you have a button to activate the Armoury Crate software. Whilst on the Razer, there are no dedicated buttons to load their software, but you can create a macro to do so. The Zephyrus S does have RGB key lighting, but it is in 4 zones rather than the per key lighting that you get on the Razer 15. The Razer 15 lighting is much brighter. But one thing that really irritates me about the Razer 15 is that the secondary function keys are not lit up, so typing in the dark is definitely more challenging. Now, one area these laptops can struggle in is multitasking, but I am pleased to say that the Zephyrus S, after repeated runs of Cinebench with the Heaven benchmark running in the background, scored 873 points versus the Razer's 841. That's not bad. Now if you do run Cinebench by itself, expect a similar performance to other i7 8750H laptops. I managed to squeeze out 1200 points. If you plan on using this laptop for real-time audio processing, then rest assured it passed my Tractor test easily. The 230 watt power supply is slightly larger than the one that's shipped with the Razer 15, and with a max power pull of 170 watts, it was more than sufficient. I saw no battery discharging whilst gaming. Let's look at some gameplay with turbo mode activated. Far Cry 5 with ultra settings ran great. Now I haven't enabled VSync here, so there is a little bit of screen tearing, so if VSync does bother you, then perhaps the G-Sync models of the Zephyrus is the way to go. Now that being said, frame rates were great and temperatures were awesome. In my charts, the Zephyrus S is at the top with the turbo mode in green. Now look at that, 83 FPS is nearly the same as the stock clock GTX 1070 in the 17-inch Asus G703. The Razer 15 performs about the same, but it's good that you do not necessarily give up that much performance going for the 1070 Max Q. Fortnite Epic settings, the GPU runs at the steady 68 degrees and the CPU in the high 70s. The CPU stays at a high boost clock and there is no throttling whatsoever. Again in turbo mode, we see a similar performance to the GTX 1070 and at 27% faster than the 1060 in the Helios 300. So remember, at $2,000 this Zephyrus S is cheaper than the GTX 1060 Razer 15. PUBG Ultra settings, the GPU running in the low 60s and the CPU in the low 70s. It's just a solid performance all around. This time the turbo mode actually beat the stock clock GTX 1070. Not by much, and the minimum frame rate is less, but still it's very good. The Razer 15 performs about the same, so both are great options. Here we have Battlefield 1 at ultra settings and using the balance mode. Now note that the GPU and the CPU aren't clocked as high compared to the turbo mode. Gameplay was great though. The GPU staying in the high 60s and the CPU in the low 70s. Compared to the regular 1070, both Max-Q models did perform less, but the Razer and the Zephyrus were neck and neck. So is the Zephyrus S the model for you? For an extra $200, you can get the Zephyrus M with a full powered GTX 1070, G-Sync and Thunderbolt 3. And, battery life on the S is not great anyway, so the extra bit of weight on the M may be a good trade-off despite, it having louder fans. Now the 1070 Max Q on the most part can compete well with the regular GTX 1070, so for a $200 saving, its shortcomings may be a reasonable trade-off. Certainly it performs very well out of the box. There's no need for any throttle stop tweaking, and for most people that is what we want to see. Compared to the Razer 15, it performs about the same, although I must point out that since the Razer does run at least 10 degrees hotter, you will likely have to do some tweaking via throttle stop to prevent it throttling. Build quality on both are both very good. And I do prefer the typing and gaming experience on the Razer keyboard, but it really does bother me that the secondary function keys aren't lit up, and that does drive me crazy. Now looking at the rest of the competition, you may decide to plunge for the Aero 15X, and if you do, I've got a coupon code which I'll put at the bottom that's $200 off. Now that does have two M.2 slots, it has Thunderbolt 3, and it also has a UHS 2 SD card reader. Now the MSI GS65 is another contender, but its build quality is not quite there, and its inverted motherboard does make their upgrades rather difficult. Now upgrading the Zephyrus S is possible, it's just a little bit more awkward than on the Razer 15 or the Aero 15X. Now remember, follow me on Twitch, as I will be continuing to do various live stream testing on all of my laptops, showing you the temperatures and the clock rates, frame rates and that type of thing. Remember also to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.